Thank you for coming to our talk on customer centricity and lifetime value. Just a little bit about me. I am the VP of Data and Analytics at TheVentureCity. If you want to follow me on social, here's my links. You can also email me. Just a quick note, Maria is going to share the deck that I'm presenting today with you. There are these links, and there's some links later on in the document that you might find helpful. So you will get those after the talk today. So, okay, so let's talk about our agenda for the talk. We're going to go through some definitions, first of all, just to kind of lay the groundwork for what we're talking about. We're going to talk about the distribution of customer value among the customers throughout your company. Then we'll talk about customer centricity, which is a model for how to use customer value as a business strategy. Then we'll get into how to calculate CLV, how to enact RFM segmentation in your business, and then some uses of RFM segmentation. So, if you have any questions, like Maria said, we'll get to them at the end. If you have questions about other things related to data and startups, I'm happy to answer those as well. So let's get started with the definitions. Real simple. We're gonna, for the purposes of this discussion, we're gonna just define a customer as someone who spends money with our business. Let's just keep it really simple. Now, some of you may have businesses that are pre-revenue, and for those, you can use other valuable actions besides spending money, like maybe posting a photo, taking a course, sharing a link, whatever it is that sort of measures the unit of value in your company is something that you can measure here. But for this discussion, let's just think of it as money. Definition of lifetime. So this is just the length of time between a customer's first transaction and her last transaction. So for active customers, the time of death is at some unknowable point in the future, meaning that prediction and being able to predict the year of a customer into the future is an important part about determining a customer's lifetime value. And then the definition of value, this is the dollars, since we're talking about money, this is the dollars that a customer's transactions bring to the business, net of expenses. So revenue alone isn't good enough to calculate value. You have to kind of account for any expenses, any variable expenses related to serving that customer. So the value is sort of the cash flow that comes in, net of the cash flow that goes out for that customer. So let's graph this out. I'm a data scientist. I like data and visuals. So let's just graph this out. On the left axis, on the y-axis, we have the amount of money that a customer has spent to date with our company. And then along the x-axis is time. So we're just measuring periods of time. This could be quarters, it could be years, whatever it is. But here we see that this customer has spent $80 in the first month. We're calling that month 0. So the month that they joined, they spent $80 with us. Okay. Then in month 1, the next month, they spent another $80. So their cumulative revenue gets up to 100 or so. And I'm over here if you can see my cursor. Then we move up to in month 2, they spend another $20 with us, 180. Then month 3, they spend another $60, and now they're up to 240. Then they spend another 40, they're up to 280, and you get the idea. They keep spending money, and therefore their cumulative revenue that they have spent with us continues to grow. And I'm getting a message that my internet connection is unstable. Maria, can you hear me okay?
No, you're good.
Okay. Bear with me, folks. Sometimes our internet is a little bit sketchy here at home, but I think it's okay right now. Okay, so I'll keep going. Maria, let me know through our chat if there's an issue.
Perfect, will do.
Okay, so that's cumulative revenue. But like we said, we're not counting revenue as value. We're counting contribution margin. This is net of variable costs. So in this case, you can kind of think of this, at least this example, a 50% contribution margin. So instead of $80 in month 0 or time period 0, it is $40. In time period 1, it's we're at $80, another $40. Time period 2, we're at 90. Time period 3, we go up to 100. By time period 4, we are at 140. So that is really the value that this customer has sort of generated over this period of time. All right. So so that is kind of what's happened to date with this customer. But we've said that lifetime value has an element of, okay, what's going to happen into the future? And so here, this is our best guess for what this customer may do into the future. We can build models, we can do various things we could draw a straight line. You can do various things to kind of predict what you think that customer is going to do. But the point here is that we expect them to spend money into the future, and we want to develop a way to understand how much that's worth. So with a future projection, if you're familiar with the concept of time value of money and discounting things back to today's dollars, we can do an adjustment there and figure out what those future cash flows are worth in today's dollars, and that's going to be less than their sort of nominal value in the future. And so that kind of pulls our projection down a little bit. So we're accounting for the time value of money because we're projecting into the future. Also, since we're projecting into the future, we can develop these are uncertainty. We can kind of quantify the uncertainty. You might think of this as a confidence interval, where 95% of the time we could expect our value for this customer to be somewhere between $150 and $225. But the base case here is roughly $175. Okay. So the overall, what we think this customer is going to spend in their entire customer lifetime, that is what we're defining as customer lifetime value. That number can be broken down into two parts. The first is what they've spent to date, the historical customer value. For a current customer, this would be some number greater than 0, right? For a future customer, this number would be 0. It's important to kind of think of this in terms of our current customer base and how much they've spent and how much we expect them to spend, but also in terms of customer acquisition and what we would expect future customers to. And then we're going to call this other piece, the piece that we expect them to earn and generate for our business into the future. This is residual customer values, or we'll call it RCV. This is from today on what we expect them to generate in value for our company. All right, so let's talk about distribution of value. So I want you to kind of think about they might be distributed in terms of, you might have an average customer, and then you'd have some customers that are worth a little bit less than that one, and maybe some customers that are worth a little bit more. And then you may have some that are, out here in the long tail, they might be worth a lot. And then you have other customers over here that aren't worth very much. And so you can kind of think of this as a normal distribution. So, a lot of people may think that their customers are distributed in this manner because it's a concept that this normal curve, this bell curve you may have heard in the past, to think of things as being distributed this way. However, I'm here to tell you that in practice, this does not happen. In almost every case I've ever seen, it is not distributed in a normal in a normal distribution. And so that has interesting implications for what we're going to do with this information. So let's look at how it's typically distributed, which is like this. This is an example of using some sample data based on a company that we work with in our portfolio. We have 7,763 total customers. And as we can see, distribution is not normal at all. We have a whole bunch of like low value customers over here on the left, where they're spending between $1 and $1,000, maybe $2,000 in terms of their customer value. But then you also have this long tail where you have just a few customers that are worth a lot of money. And most of the value of your company is in this long tail. So we did a predictive model and did a whole bunch of calculations around this particular company. And we figured that these are the top 10% of customers that are in this long tail. And we kind of highlight them here in this slide. So if we take those top 10% of customers, then we can chart those out and see how much residual customer value they're expected to bring us into the future. And we see that just those top 10% are expected to bring us 53% of value. So this is a really important insight that I want you guys to take away from this discussion, which is your customers are not normally distributed. They are not normal, right? Instead, there's a few customers that generate a high percentage of the value in your company. And then if we kind of go down to this next row, we can see that 84% of the future value is accounted for by 30% of the customers. So again, there's this relatively small number of customers that account for most of the value in the company. So this insight here leads to a business strategy called customer centricity. So customer centricity aligns the development and delivery of products and services with the current and future needs of the highest value customers. So you're only looking at that long tail in order to maximize those customers' long-term financial value to the firm. So in other words, you're not thinking of the whole customer base here. You're thinking of just the highest value customers that you've identified. So what is it not? It is not perfecting customer service. It's not aligning strategy with the overall customer base, as I just mentioned. It's not asking what the average customer is worth. It's not chasing down product sales to anyone and everyone at any cost. What it is you're looking at the array of customers that you have, and you look at their preferences. You look at their propensity to purchase. You look at their potential. And you'll see that there are differences between them. In terms of preference, we say that that's just how your offering aligns with their specific needs, and how likely they are for them to choose you over some competitor's offering. With propensity, that means just the likelihood of being loyal and referring others, buying higher value offerings, etc. And then potential is the future value of each customer. So this leads to, perhaps rethinking how you even align your company. Many companies, especially startups, are thinking about, I've got a product that I want to build, right? And you think about, your feature backlog and the number of new products that you build and how much revenue those products are generating and what kind of market share those products are getting. So that is a product-centric view of the world. A customer-centric view says, let's measure different things and assess the success of our company based on those things. There is customer share of the most valuable customer satisfaction, customer lifetime value, customer retention. These are the things that you should measure if you're taking a customer-centric view of the world, and can be a way to align the activities that you're undertaking in your business with the value, with value creation from your best customers. So to be customer-centric, just to kind of summarize this, you have to identify which current and future customers are projected to bring in the most future value. And to do that, there's two approaches. One is to build predictive models, as I alluded to before. It's relatively complex. Kind of goes in and involves putting all your customer data into Python and running a predictive model, and it's a little complex. And then there's recency, frequency, and monetary value, or we'll call that RFM analysis, which is an easier shortcut. And I'll go through kind of why that is here in a moment. So calculating CLV, as I just mentioned, there's two approaches. There's the over here on the right, there's the predictive models approach. So you get everything you get with RFM, plus you get a probability score for each customer to figure out, if they're alive. You get monetary values of residual customer value and customer lifetime value for each customer, and that can help you guide things like segmentation and marketing spend. You generally want to take this approach when you have achieved product market fit, you have a growing number of customers, you have a longer time in market. So each customer, you have customers with long customer histories, and then you have a lot of customers. And so having all this data helps you build better predictive models. Now, for earlier stage startups that might not have found their product market fit, I'm going to propose that just using RFM is probably a good enough solution at this stage of the evolution of your business. So this is a little bit simpler. We're just going to focus on the inputs to the predictive model, which are the R, F, and the M. We're going to use bins for each of those classifications to identify the top customer. We'll be able to see changes in individual customer behavior, and we can look at cohort histories for the payback period. Instead of using sort of customer lifetime value to determine how much to spend on marketing, you can use the cumulative revenue and use that cumulative value, and use that to determine your payback period for how much you're spending on customer acquisition, and then you can try to minimize the payback period that you're using to acquire customers. So the good news here is that your most valuable customers are those with the highest R, F, and M values. Therefore, you don't have to build a predictive model. You don't have to bother calculating CLV. Instead, you can segment each individual customer into R, F, and M quantiles and save the predictive models for later, when you have more data, when you have more history, and you might have a data person to kind of help you out doing that. So let's just take a minute to kind of think about each individual customer in our business. These are little timelines for different customers. Every dot is a purchase day, and the size of the dot is the size of the purchase. So if they have a big circle, then they spent a lot of money that day. If they have a smaller circle, they didn't spend very much money that day. And then along the x-axis is just a timeline. So we're looking at kind of a customer's purchase activity over time. All right. And because I'm a data nerd, I like to just look at these things and look for patterns and so on. But let's just kind of look at one or two of these customers and just kind of see what we can infer from them. So the first one's up here. This one has an 8-month customer history so far. They have purchased about 2 to 3 times per week initially, and it's tapered off a little bit recently, right? We can see that at least initially there was a very frequent customer, and then lately they have tapered off. Their average ticket size is $74. That's the amount of revenue that they generate for us, but the contribution margin is less than $10. And their most recent purchase is 30th of September. This data set ends at the end of October. So it's been about 30 days for this customer since the last purchase. let's look at another one, just to kind of get a feel for the customer history. So this one has been buying from us for 12 months. They really only have 4 total purchases, but when they do purchase, they have a high dollar amount. There's 3 tickets of $1,833 each. Each of those has generated $250 in contribution margin to our company. The most recent purchase was 3 months ago. All right, so you can kind of go through this and look at more and more companies, but as you do, you start to kind of come up with some observations here. So one of the observations is that while a customer is active, she's randomly buying around some purchase rate. All right, so I might be a weekly, or roughly a weekly shopper, and I'll buy randomly around roughly once a week, right? I might take 10 days and then I might take 3 days, but generally speaking, it's around a week. Maria might shop every month. You might shop every day. And so different people have different buying patterns, and you don't perfectly adhere to that buying pattern, but you instead buy sort of randomly around that pattern. All right. The next observation is that customers just have heterogeneous shopping habits. Obviously, the purchase rates, as we just mentioned, are heterogeneous. They're not the same, but also monetary amount. We saw that one of those customers spent $74 every time. The other customer spent $1,800 every time. And so they're making different types of purchases, and they just have different things that they buy, or different habits for how they spend their money. And so that's an important observation. And then some customers may already be lost, never to return. Case where we can't tell if they've already churned, really know for sure whether or not those people will ever come back, right? If they purchased more recently. Maria, can you hear me okay?
Sorry,
Maria?
I can. You're good.
Okay, good. Sorry, I got another internet slowness thing. All right, so there's a chance, if someone hasn't purchased in some amount of time, there's a chance that they may never come back. They may have found change their lifestyle, who knows? And so they're never going to return. But we told us, right? So we don't necessarily know. And then, not all customers are equally committed to our product or our company or our. Some people are flakier. Some people are less loyal. And so we have to kind of account for those factors. Basically, the upshot here is that customers are complex and messy, but if you celebrate the heterogeneity, you can use it to your advantage.
David, quick question from someone. He was wondering what the business model of the company that you use an example is, if you can say.
A good question, thank you. It is an e-commerce company that is selling a wide array of products. So you can kind of think of this as someone buying, this person is buying makeup as kind of a consumable product that they buy often, and they might be reselling it, but they buy it in small. This customer here is buying iPads or iPhones. They're buying Apple products through this service, and so they're under no contract under no obligation to continue purchasing with our company, but they continue to come back because they like something about the service. So we call this a non-contractual situation. There are other situations that we're not really going to discuss today, but where you might have a subscription model where they sort of tell you, like, hey, I'm canceling my subscription. That is a slightly different model. It's similar, but slightly different in terms of kind of how you calculate lifetime value. But you can, I think it's important to kind of understand the difference between the contractual situation where they've signed up and they said, okay, I'm going to purchase from you every month till I break this subscription contract, versus non-contractual, which is kind of what we're looking at here, which is just going into an online store and at your leisure. Hope that answers the question. Okay. So let's talk, okay, so we're gonna kind of take these general observations and make them into something of an algorithm, right? and this is that to figure out customer lifetime value, we're gonna talk about churn risk. So is she still a customer? Maybe, maybe not. There's some risk there, so maybe calculate that. Purchase propensity. How many purchases does she make when she is purchasing? And then spending habits. How much money does she spend when she's purchasing? And then we can take those numbers, those three together give us, you know, if we can predict each of those things give us the future value of our customer. And we can add that to the historical value, what they've already spent. That's easy to calculate. And that gives us the overall number for customer lifetime value. So thinking about these three things that calculate future value, there are kind of three inputs to these, to building a future model for these. One is recency. So this is the length of time since the last purchase. If you just bought something yesterday, we're going to consider you much more likely to buy in the future than if you haven't bought in a year, right? Frequency, the total number of purchases in a customer's lifetime. That factors into churn risk, and it also factors into purchase propensity and spending habits. If someone is very, very frequent, and then all of a sudden they stop buying, and that goes on for some period of time, their churn risk goes up, right? Because the fact that they used to buy all the time and now they don't buy anymore indicates that they may have had a change of habit or change of vendor or something that has led them to become much more of a churn risk than they were when they were buying all the time. However, to contrast that, you might have somebody that, you know, buys once a month, and if they haven't bought in a month and a half, is their churn risk super high? Well, not. I mean, they're still buying randomly around this kind of monthly cycle, and so maybe they just, you know, they went on vacation and for weeks, and they're about to buy again. So someone who is less frequent, their churn risk drops less precipitously over time. It takes a little longer for their churn risk to rise significantly. And then with monetary value, you know, this is the average ticket size and net of variable costs that they provide to the company. And so the spending habits have to do with how much they spend per purchase, plus the number, the frequency that they spend. So those are the inputs to, you know, predictive models that help us understand customer lifetime value. And so what we can do is just use those things to help us find the most valuable customers. And so let's walk through how to do that. So first you need data. And the biggest piece of advice here is just instrument early. Make sure you record all your transactions. And if you're not recording transactions, then make sure you're getting every transaction or event or whatever it is that you're trying to measure that indicates a customer's value. If that's, you know, shares, count the number of shares. If that's likes, if it's, you know, posts of videos, whatever it is, measure those so you can understand, okay, who did it, when did they do it, and you have a log of all those things happening. So what this ends up looking like is just this raw transactional data. So you have a user ID, so we're looking at every single user, at the date. You might divide them into segments, but that's not necessarily relevant here. But then you have the amount of money that they brought in, the income to the company. And so here we have 10011A, and we have 10017A and 10028A. So we have 3 customers, and we can kind of convert this into an RFM summary. So user ID, this first one has bought 14 times. Recency, this is the length of their total lifetime, and this is the average monetary value. And so we can go through and develop this every customer that we have. And that's an important sort of first step in doing this. And And I wanted to point out, we have an Excel workbook that you can take and use that does this for you. If you draw transactional data, it will do this conversion into the RFM summary and then help you turn it into what we're about to talk about later, which is the RFM segments. Like I mentioned at the outset, this deck will be available to you at the end of the talk, but and so this link will be available to you. You can go get this workbook. All right, so we have transformed our data and figured out an RFM summary, and now let's talk a little bit about how to kind of operationalize this. Like, who should do this if you have a relatively small startup? I mean, it could be anybody, frankly. Typically, it's somebody either in product or in market. You know, in startups, people wear different hats, and you know, you might have the person who's doing product also doing marketing, some engineer who's really good at SQL and Excel, or maybe it's a combination of people. So you just need to figure out who's the right person on your team who's kind of interested in this and has the skill set and can get the data and convert it and turn it into something meaningful. I think the other important thing is to broadcast this analysis out to the whole team so everyone is kind of thinking about customer value. If you want to take a customer-centric approach, you know which customers are valuable, and so if everyone has this information, then the whole team can kind of align customer value. How often should you do it? You know, I would suggest doing it fairly often. Customers can change their behavior over time. You might do it once a week, once every 2 weeks, once every month. And turn it into actionable, actionable things that you're going to do, whether it's with your product or with your marketing or operations, customer service, whatever. Because you want to stay in touch with how your customers are behaving, how they're evolving, and then you can compare customer segments from 1 week to the next, and that's something that you can see. You know, are they getting better in terms of value? Are they getting worse? And so you want to kind of see that evolution so that you can align your business to help more customers move into better segments. So let's talk, so RFM segmentation in terms of looking at, if we go back to the original predictive model that I did before with this kind of sample company, I found out that I found the residual customer value for every customer that we had already acquired, and I put them into bins where you have the frequency. So the most frequent customers are frequency 3. The second most frequent customers are frequency 2, and then frequency 1 are the least frequent customers. Same thing with recency. The most recent customers are recency 3. The least recent are recency 1. Right? And then monetary value 1, 2, 3. The most value is in 3. So 3. If you're 3, 3, 3, then you're the best, right? And you're down here, and as we can see, this is the customers with the most residual customer value. The average customer in that little square is worth over $5,600 to us. Now, if we look at, in comparison, if you look at the 111, this customer worth $73 to us. So it's a big differential between the top levels and the bottom levels. So we can also look at customer counts in these bins, and we see that there's lots of customers in the 333 zone, and even more customers down here in the low value. And so that is kind of, going back to that original histogram, these are kind of all of those low value customers. Let's see. This is the customer. 13% of our customers are down here, and then 16% are up here, and then we filled in the rest of the matrix that way. But what this is all getting at is kind of the key takeaway is that these two cells right here represent 21% of all customers. And then if we tie that back with the residual customer value, there is these 21% of all customers account for 71% of all value. So now we've kind of figured out, we've basically done the same thing we did with the histogram, but we didn't have to calculate the customer lifetime value that would have been necessary in order to create the histogram. Instead, what we've done is just use these RFM to identify the most valuable customers. And so in this way, you can identify by name, or by customer ID, all of the customers that are the ones that are driving value for you. And so, here's a common thing that a lot of companies do. They'll put it into a matrix, and they'll say, okay, our champions, our best customers are the ones. This is just to introduce this chart. Instead of using 3 bins, we're using 5 bins, and we have removed the monetary value from the equation. We're just kind of plotting this on the RF scale. There's a lot of different ways to kind of slice and dice this data. But basically here, we're trying to isolate, okay, who are our champion customers? These are, the really great customers that are the ones that are driving all of our value. And then who are the ones that are at risk? It's these over here that have been, they've been frequent in the past, but they have not purchased from us in a while. They're the ones that, we call them can't lose them or at risk. And those are the ones that we want to, there's a much different treatment of the customers over here in the upper left than there is these champions here in the upper right. And then there's these potential loyalists, these ones that are recent, but they haven't been very, and so is there a way to make them more frequent? So there's, as you look at different parts of this matrix here, you can kind of see that there are different approaches that you would want to take to the customers. And that kind of gets back to this whole notion of customer-centricity, and that you treat customers differently. You don't treat them as average customers. You treat them as customers that have a certain behavior that you need to kind of cater to and align your processes with, your product, your marketing, your customer service, etc. Another way to look at this is segment movements. So you can run your RFM for, up through last month, and then you can run it up through the end of, you might have the end of May and the end of June, and you can kind of see, okay, what happened during June? In which direction did customers move? You have some new customers. You have some of those new customers move into the champion segment. Some of them become low value customers. Some are at risk. Some are churn. So you're basically kind of at this chart and then seeing how customers are moving from one square to another. And you can kind of see that the green arrows here indicate positive movement, that these customers here, move from at risk to low value or good customers. So that is a good sign, right? They were considered at risk customers, and now they're considered something better than that. Here they were low value, and now they're moving to good customers. Here they were good customers, and they moved to champions. So that is an indication that these customers are moving in the right direction. And so you can use this movement information to help you kind of figure out the effectiveness of marketing strategies, for example. It's like, oh, we had a marketing strategy that was aimed at the at-risk customers. How many of those were we able to convert into different segments and improve their customer value, the outlook for customer value? So that's an example of kind of looking at the dynamics of this and tying that back to measuring the success of marketing campaigns or product improvements or whatever it is. So just to kind of wrap this up, the implications for startups are that there's some do's and don'ts, right? We'll just say that you want to place them into segments based on the future value to the company, straight up. And then based on those segments, you want to allocate your resources. You're a startup. You do not have lots of resources. So, allocate those towards building long-term relationships with the most valuable customers. Don't, ask what the average customers, align the strategy with the needs of the overall customer base, chase down product sales to anyone and everyone, or do more math than is necessary, right? I'm not endorsing doing a complex, future value calculation at this stage of the game for most startups. I'm saying RFM is good because it helps you build the matrix we saw, and that helps you understand, okay, which ones are valuable and which ones aren't. So I'll also point out that we have a lot of this is also in blog form on our blog, and I have links in English and Spanish. I'm interested in that. The Excel workbook that I alluded to earlier, that's available, it's on Dropbox and it's available to everybody, so feel free to download that. And that is just another way to kind of stay in touch with us. We are going to be adding to this CLV series because we're going to talk about, I alluded to, well, you have a strategy for, at-risk customers, and you've improved it. Well, what are those strategies for at-risk customers? So that is going to be part 4, and we expect that to come out relatively soon, and we'll make it available through our social channels. So I would encourage you to look for that. But that's going to conclude my talk for today. I want to say obrigado, gracias, and thank you. And I think we can open up the floor for questions.
Wonderful. Great job, David. Thank you for that. Just a reminder, use the Q&A feature. I'm going to get to some of the questions. So the first one is coming from Pedro Almeida, and he's asking, do you have any particular tools to collect and analyze data other than Excel? Thinking of mixed panel, segment, etc.
Yeah, it's a good question. And yes, we encourage the use of mixed panel, segment. Amplitude is very popular. What I've found is probably Amplitude and mixed panel are the kind of the two leading contenders, and they have the ability, what I've done in the past to do these type of calculations is to actually export the data. And I think you can export it into some kind of cloud data store, and then get in there and query it and get it at a user level. You can get this information into the format that you need it in terms of user ID and activity date and income amount from a place like mixed panel or segment. Oftentimes, things like a Stripe transaction log, for example, is very useful because that gives you all the transactions. You may have this in a proprietary database. We see a lot of folks with, it might be ODB, it might be Postgre, it might be MySQL, whatever. You've built a database that's part of your application, and that's actually probably the best system of record that you can have. So, certainly I think for recording events that are non-monetary, segment pointing to either mixed panel or Amplitude is probably the best. It's the best way to do that because it makes the instrumentation the easiest, I guess. What I have also found is maybe that you don't want to use is something like Google Analytics, which doesn't give you that customer or user level view of the data. A lot of it's all sort of aggregated. It's valuable in its own way, but you can't get it down to, okay, this customer is spending lots of money with us necessarily. Now, you can get in there, well, you can spend a lot of money with Google Analytics and get that information, but it's not generally available with the free version.
Awesome, thank you. Now we have 2 questions that are pretty much the same around, you mentioned that the model is slightly different for subscription-based companies.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little more to how you can apply the RFM model to a subscription model?
Yeah, so there are various models. It kind of fits under this category of survival analysis, where you have a cohort of customers, people, and then over time there's some sort of decay. They die off and they're no longer customers, and you can kind of model it out using survival analysis, and there's kind of censored data and non-censored data and lots of different ways to look at it. But I would just, but that is another way to get to a customer specific predictive model of of future value, but it's more for the contractual case that I was talking about, as opposed to the time to use survival analysis is when you can observe the moment that they churn. Like, hey, I'm canceling my subscription to my cell phone or whatever. The e-commerce example that I brought up earlier, you can't observe the moment of churn. You just have to kind of a predictive, you put a probability around whether or not that person's going to come back, but you can't say for sure one way or the other that they have indeed churned. So that's kind of how we.
Okay. Magdalena wanted to know, can you go back to the kind of the payback period earlier in the presentation that she didn't understand?
Yeah, I mentioned it and then I didn't talk about it too much. So let me scroll up to the, oh boy, no, I've done it. I'll go back up to kind of that original part where we were defining everything, and let me just get up there. So now we're all watching this presentation backwards. You know it backwards and forwards. So just a few more. Hang on. Okay, so let's look at this, and basically what we're saying here is like, all right, let's say you spent $100 to acquire this customer. The payback period would be where $100 matches this line. And if you can see the little hand here, it's at roughly, I don't know, 2.3 time periods. All right, so the goal here is, if you spend $50, then the payback period is like 0.3 time periods. So what we're trying to do is just minimize the payback period of that money spent. So if you spend less money, you'll be lower down on this curve, but you can use this historical information to sort of help you understand what your payback period is my point. Growth stage startups and more mature companies try to look at the overall customer lifetime value number and say, okay, I'm going to peg my spending to roughly 30 to 40% of that customer lifetime value number, and that's my marketing budget. What I would say is, for an earlier stage company, you don't have enough history built up. It's difficult to build up enough confidence in that number where your confidence interval is tight enough so that you can, so you can operate. And so, reliable number early on in your company's history. Sorry. So the next best thing is to instead of using some prediction of the future that you're sure about, you can use historical values that you are sure about, and use that to kind of help you come up with a way to measure your marketing spend and drive toward a number of trying to minimize that payback period as like a key performance indicator. Hope that made sense.
Great, thank you. I'm going to get to the next question, but I'm also, just a heads up, posting a link to our next event, which will be same time, same day next week, Tuesday at 11, and it's on how VCs make decisions. It says Madrid because the gentleman who's giving the talk is based out of our Madrid office, but it'll be at 11. So I hope you guys can join us. We'll also send a link to this in our email later today. But next question, is from Arthur. What do you think about the usability of the LTV on B2B business models, where usually the client buys at a one-time punctual contract?
Well, I think if you're talking about a contract and it's like a subscription model, that is more in line with the survival analysis that I was talking about. So, however, let's in terms of LTV and well, really RFM, you know, I think what I might do on that is separate it out into the monetary value that they're bringing in, and then are they using the system? So maybe what we want to do is measure it along two different dimensions. One is, okay, we can do the survival analysis of their contract, but also can we understand if they're using the system, right? Are they, you know, are they an engaged user? And so if they are paying for the service but they're not using it, then you would say that risk is higher, like that customer may churn when the it's up. If they are heavily engaged, you can say that the risk is lower. And so you might want to separate them into RFM usage categories as opposed to RFM monetary categories. And then you could understand the churn risk from the survival analysis. You might want to split it into those two different types of analysis so you can kind of get a fuller picture for how at risk that customer is and how likely they are to churn. Like, basically what you're trying to do is turn this into something that you can make actionable, right? It's like, okay, I've got a paying customer, but they haven't even used the system for 4 weeks. You know, there's something about it that they're not finding valuable. It's not part of their business. And so you might want to reach out to them. You might want to remind them that the service is available. There's various things you can do, but you're trying to basically understand where the risk is and then look for ways to address that. Conversely, you also want to find where the risk isn't and reward those customers, or you know, give them, you know, higher marks on your customer service queue or other things, so that you're you know, bottom line, treat your customers differently based on the level of risk and the level of value that they're bringing into your company.
We'll take that and our, you know, just us and the Silver Hill team, and then run through that.
Great. All right. The next question is from Paola. What would be the recency in a subscription model and also the monetary value?
These are some of the unknowns.
Well, so in a subscription model, it's kind of like what I was just saying. I mean, I think you would want to, it's a similar answer. I mean, the recency is just whenever they, whenever they paid their last subscription, at least for the monetary transaction. However, since that's on a schedule, that only tells you part of the story, right? So I think you also want to look at the recent usage and the frequency of their usage. You might not call it RFM, you might call it RF, but looking at that, so they may be paying their subscription. Maybe it's on an automated credit card basis, and so I would be probably more interested in looking at the usage frequency and recency equally the frequency of the subscription payment itself, and then I think you can do the survival analysis piece to kind of figure out how many folks what is the risk level of a particular customer, and then you can tie that to, okay, what is their sort of usage level, and then bring those two things together to figure out, okay, is this revenue at risk, and should we have a strategy to address it?
Great. All right. A question, do you have any suggestions on further reading regarding metrics to e-commerce/marketplace businesses at various stages of development?
So
that's a change for us.
Metrics to e-commerce and marketplace businesses. So generally speaking, the non-contractual, well, I guess there's different types of marketplaces, but both the supply and the demand side of the marketplace are going to behave in a non-contractual manner. And so I would say that you want to treat both of those sides as like its own set of customers and its own business. They both bring in customer value, and you can look at the reach and the frequency and the monetary value of both sides of the marketplace. And then I would say that this notion of don't go crazy with the predictive modeling, at least in the beginning, applies to these as well. Just looking at kind of two businesses, either side of the marketplace, as opposed to just one. And then let's see, as further reading, that's a good question in terms of specifically related to the various stages of development. Certainly, let's see.
Does Lenny cover this, David?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, he's looking at the marketplaces that that kind of survived and what the drivers were. I do think that's an excellent recommendation, and maybe we can share that on our social account or share it with the attendees of this session. But Lenny Rachitsky is a former Airbnb product manager who's done some really great work in terms of sort of breaking down the success of various types of marketplaces, and helping understand how they, how did they grow supply, and how did they bring together supply and demand, and what were the factors, how did they grow this basically. And so I would definitely encourage you to look at his work, particularly if you're in the marketplace field.
Perfect. I just included the link to the YouTube video when we had him visit campus and kind of give a talk. But he has a ton of resources and a newsletter on marketplace businesses that you might find useful. I think we have time maybe for one other question. There's one on any reading suggestions for how to predict CLV for a startup investor pitch.
Well, what we often do is try to draw these historical curves, right? At least you can take the data that you have and divide it into, okay, customers that started in January, here's the ones that started in February, here's the ones that started in March, and here is their kind of cumulative value that they have provided to our company. Now, you might not be able to do a whole bunch of predictive modeling, but at least you can begin to have a discussion with your investors in a pitch deck where you're drawing this historical line, between 0 and 4 here, and then you can make assumptions. We expect this line to go out in a linear fashion for the following reasons, or we expect this number to actually move super linearly because we have plans to introduce new products, or we expect this number to decay over time for these reasons. And so at least that helps you have a data-driven conversation with your investor around, here's what we've seen so far. There's a ton of uncertainty, but at least this gives us a baseline to start talking. And sometimes admitting that you don't necessarily have all the answers, but here's the data that we do have, and here's what it would be reasonable to expect if current trends continue, or if certain things future, then that's the kind of thing that I would recommend for an investor deck, especially for an early stage startup.
How about if they have no numbers yet? Any suggestions?
Well, this is all very difficult if you have no numbers, because you're really looking for your customers to tell you how they want to behave with your product. And so that's where launching and putting product into the market and getting their feedback is super valuable, rather than theorizing and not launching anything. I mean, we definitely preach, put a product into the market, see what you can learn from it, build, measure, learn, repeat, and if nothing else, you can put a product into the market and start collecting data on it. And that can be extremely valuable to using that data for future decision making.
Okay, last question from Caesar. How much time of historical data is necessary to start use of RFM? How much
Yeah,
data
I
do you
mean,
need under your belt, you think?
yeah, I mean, you need a certain number of customers and a certain number of certain amount of just history. What I've seen in building models is that if you have, I don't know, somewhere around 100 to 200 customers, the predictive power of the model starts to kind of come into focus. If it's less than that, then it's sending some messages, but it's also sending a lot of noise, and you can't really make much sense of it. It does start to get more and more powerful around that 100 to 200 customer standpoint, and to get to that point, you may need 6 to 9 months of operating history. So.
All right. I know we're a little bit past schedule, so I don't want to keep you guys. I'm sorry for any questions we didn't get to, but thank you all for joining us. We usually have something like this every other Tuesday for kind of the Americas team, but you can always join our ones from our kind of Europe team as well. Reminder for next week's event on how VCs make decisions. It's really interesting, especially if you're a startup founder, to really understand how you can better approach VCs and know which VCs to approach given kind of their investment strategy and what part of their kind of investment timeline they're on. So thank you again to David. Again, we'll be sending the slides as well as the recording of this video, hopefully by later today, if not tomorrow. And please fill out the survey, let us know your thoughts, let us know what other topics you're interested in us covering, as well as if you have any recommendations or are interested in our growth program, which David is a huge part of. So thank you all again, and I hope to see you at a future webinar.